Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching, and welcome to another crazy kit bash this week using three sort of base sets. Box of Plague Bearers that I've just bought brand new for some parts, the Ballistus Dreadnought from the 10th edition 40k release box, and a load of Nurgle bits that I've just dredged through my Nurgle kind of spare parts box to get. Now, starting to build off, you see there I've built the legs of the Dreadnought, but before sticking it to the base, I want to get the base to match the rest of my Nurgle army. So digging out the milliput here, smearing it onto the base and using the Green Stuff World textured base roller to get the cobbles right. Now, I made a little mistake here. Normally what we do is put a little bit of tissue paper underneath the middle of a big base, so that when it bows in, it doesn't bow in, the tissue paper stops it. Didn't do that, rolled back and forward a few times, which you can do if you're careful doing it. Now, pushing the legs into the kind of milliput around the edges there, and it will seal it onto the base, but I did also use polystyrene cement on the parts that weren't going to touch it. And now it's time to start the crazy kit bash part. Didn't really have a full overall plan when doing this, kind of made it up as I was going along. Started with the legs and I chopped off the back of the legs there, whatever that piece of equipment is, whether it's a generator or whatever. Nice big blob of milliput stuck onto the back there, and then took one of the favourite spare parts from the Sculpting model that, if you've watched the channel for a long while, you'll know that I took this, I made some castings of it, and I've used those castings on a few different kits. It was time to actually use the original part onto the butthole, I suppose we're going to call it, being a little bit crude there, but I am making a backside of a Dreadnought. Put it on there, made a little bit of an impression, then took a sculpting tool, and then I'm hollowing out the area where the kind of gnashing teeth are going to go around. Now, I don't think I've ever seen a Dreadnought with a butthole. Have you? Has anyone done it before? The only model I can think of actually that's got anything like this on it would be a Midwinter Minis Land Raider model. It's the excellent kind of freaky body horror Land Raider, and that was on a side door. Is this a first? Let me know if you've seen one before. So positioning it there and literally using the milliput to seal this in place. It will seal rock solid as we're going, so no need to use any glue or anything on this part. And then taking a sculpting tool to make the inside of the mouth kind of how I think I like it. And then again, sculpting it around the edges to really seal this kind of in. Now it's continuing the legs. Again, milliput, when you mix it up, so two-part kind of like epoxy putty type stuff, you've got somewhere about 45 minutes of really quality working time with it. A lot longer if it's cold, a lot shorter if it's hot, but plenty of time just to kind of really get this conversion done. And this leg conversion I did in one evening, and then I worked on some of it later, as you'll see. So taking that, working down the legs, and then taking the tentacles, and I think this is from the Sculpting model as well, because when I built the Sculpting it was turned into an Imperial Knight, so lots of spare tentacle parts. Not entirely sure where this tentacle part came from. If you look at the channel and the playlist, you'll see I've done a lot of Nurgle over the last sort of 2-3 years, so I do have quite an extensive spare parts box, and literally I just kind of went through all the spare parts thinking what's going to fit, what'll be nice. So I've literally just used the milliput to hold these tentacles in place, and then it's kind of doing the process that how I Nurgle up the kind of horrible fleshy areas. So these are little balls of milliput and green stuff, and anytime I kind of use milliput and green stuff before it sets, if I've got bits left, I'll just roll some little balls, because that's how I make the bases. It's also how I make the kind of horrible fleshy bits. So taking some of those balls, pushing them into the milliput so that they seal in, and doing, you know, a few different sections of that. Tend to do it in little groups of 3 because it fits with that kind of Nurgle theme. Then taking the end of a sculpting tool and literally just poking tiny little indentations all around that fleshy area to make it look bumpy, ridged, bit manky and horrible. And this is what it looks like after when it was about ready to set. So that's the legs kind of done. So I did the legs on one evening kind of process, let them set overnight, and then started the body on the next session. So before I've stuck together any of the torso of the Ballistus Dreadnought, drilled a hole from the inside, and that was just to give myself some space for the clippers to purchase. What I wanted to kind of go for was that this Dreadnought, the pilot, has been either torn out himself or he's been possessed or something like that, and then the Nurgle sort of demon that's possessing him is bursting out of the Dreadnought. It's kind of a technique I've done before when I've done knights and things like that, kind of the idea that the pilot or the person inside is being possessed and Nurgle's taking over and it's kind of ripping through. Now with this Ballistus Dreadnought, you do have obviously the 2 sections of the torso. So I chopped up the middle section for the inner section first, and then kept comparing it to the outer section, making sure that these areas where the bursting was going to fit. Now I did start gluing it together before I realised, oh hang on, I need a way of building up the insides. So I put a bit of a green stuff plug in there, And then this is actually the only part of the actual plague bearers I use in the build, other than some Nurglings we'll get to later. So taking what I think is the coolest plague bearer head, the screaming one with the horn out the top of it, pushing that onto the plug of green stuff, so it looks like the plague bearer is kind of being manifested and ripping out of the kind of torso of the Dreadnought. So yeah, there we go. That was the initial idea for this kind of torso. And that's what started it all, because if you've watched a previous video, you know I did this with a Great Unclean one, ripping its way out of a Titan. Quite liked the concept, not a Titan, a Knight. A Titan would be insane. That's maybe something to think about in the future. So that was another concept. Quite happy with this. And now it's deciding what other parts I was going to use to really sort of bring to life the kind of Nurglisation. So again, you'll see a lot of parts on this build from the Glockkin model. It's only now actually doing the voiceover that I'm realising how many Glockkin parts I actually used. The Glockkin comes with lots of these very, very cool kind of horns and spikes and things that I didn't use when I converted it into a Knight. So really you saw there, cutting the bottom of the spike, I think it was a little bit too big. And then you'll see this is how I kind of seal on a lot of the conversion parts as we're going round. To make it look and kind of blend into the whole model as a whole, take a big plug of green stuff, push it onto the actual main body of the model, and then push the donor part that I'm going to use into it, so it kind of squishes outwards, very technical term, and then using a sculpting tool to kind of push this around and kind of up the part that I'm going on to really seal it kind of on. And then it's the same process you saw around kind of the leg area. So then pushing in these little balls of milliput or green stuff and then texturizing it just like we did before. So you can see there I've used a couple of different horns bursting out of the body. I've also then stuck on the missile launcher arm. Didn't show the build of that. I've not built that in any fancy way. Just stuck that on, but again using a plug of green stuff to have it holding away from the body with a little bit of Nurglisation built in. Now one of the latest videos I've done was with a Blight drone, and I converted one with some armature parts and did the original. Now the great thing about that model is you get tons and tons of spare Nurgle weapons. I did want this to be armed with lascannon, because again I'm going to use this as a hellbrute with a ranged weapon hellbrute sort of setup. So removing the lascannons off the model, and I could have just used the standard lascannon parts if you've not got, you know, spare blight drone parts or anything like that, that's fine. But really I wanted just to kind of nurgle up the lascannons, keeping them as lascannons, not changing them to anything else. So I took two of the plague spewers that you get on that model and really just taking away all of the kind of back parts where it's the fuel tanks and things like that, removing the cables and really cutting it down to get access to the barrels. Now you saw there, putting the two of them together would have been a little bit too bulky and wide, so on one of them I'm cutting off the lower kind of support pipe, I don't know what you'd call it, taking that off so that I can put the two of these weapon sets together, make them a similar size to the lascannons, and also make it look not like the plague spewers, because obviously you don't want it to look like it's got fuel and things when it's a lascannon. So you can see there's some big chunky parts of the model. Just take your time when you're doing this, you know, and it worked quite nicely. You see there, they push together very nicely. The ends of the guns still wasn't quite happy with because they look, you know, unlike a lascannon. So removing those, I did remove much more of this later on. And that's another tip if you're doing any kind of kit bash like this. If you're not 100% sure what kind of size you want the kit to be or how you do it, take the minimum off you can, because you can always go back and take a little bit more off. If you do it the way around and just think, oh, it'll be fine there, and chop it right back, you might end up making a mistake. So you can see here, constantly putting the pieces together, comparing them, seeing what I think I like the look of, looking at the piece I'm next going to put on, thinking, no, it doesn't look quite right, and then go back and remove a little bit more, trim it down a little bit, experiment and play. Bear in mind, there's no right or wrong, especially when you're doing a Nurgle kit bash, because if it goes a bit horribly wrong, it's Nurgle. It kind of doesn't really matter, I suppose, in the end. But you can see there with the two kind of is there a torso of a gun? The main parts, the torso element of the gun, if that is even a thing, stuck onto the end of the lascannons there. I haven't put the actual lascannon ends on yet because I wasn't 100% sure I liked it. They go on later in the build, but I didn't include that in the video. Now it's time to sort of de-Nurgle, or de-Imperium some of these parts. So chopping off the purity seals off the armour there. I'll leave the skull on because that's still quite chaosy, but chopping off the purity seals with a pair of clippers and just damaging up the armour a little bit. Now it doesn't matter how much or how little damage you do, but it works really well having a really battered up Dreadnought, especially any chaos, but especially Nurgle. Now I hadn't done any battle damage around the rest of the model so far, and while I was pondering kind of what the next part of this build was going to be, I took some time just to go around and just battle damage up a lot of the rest of the model. Now this was on a separate night, I believe, so actually all the green stuff parts you see in here have been set. If I was doing this on the missile launcher arm when that green stuff hadn't set, I would probably impact that green stuff and make a mess of it. Now I've clipped off the end of a missile there from the pod, and then just taking a pin drill and drilling out the missile hole itself, so you can actually see it's kind of launched out of the tube. Doing some bullet wounds and missile impacts and that kind of stuff around here. Again, drill a small indentation into the plastic, and using a hobby knife, just widen that out so it looks like a proper, heavy weapon has just impacted it into there. So that's the kind of process for battle damaging. Clipping some bits off, chopping some big chunks out, drilling some bullet holes and things, and widening out the hobby knife, and then taking the edge of the hobby knife and just rounding off some of the sharp edges, chopping bits out, so it looks like this thing has really been in some serious battle, which I suppose it would have been, because it would have had to have been taken down by the Death Guard to then possess the pilot, which is kind of my little backstory of this, and it's quite nice. So drilling a hole in the top torso, this initially started off as being a kind of missile impact, something like that, and then I changed my mind and I drilled the hole big enough to get this kind of fiery branded skull thing in there. Now I've stuck the last cannon on, you see then the same process as the others, and this is where the build was at, and I sent this off to a couple of mates. I don't think I put this one on Instagram, and just sort of said, how do we think, what's it coming to? And it can be worth sometimes like that, just pausing that build, having a look, spinning it around, getting some other people's opinions, what do you think I should do next, and even just letting it sit and think for yourself. Decided at this point, the bit I hadn't ever really touched was the power plants. So I chopped off the top of the power plant there, so the actual exhaust vents, and took these bits, which again is some part, I don't know if these are from Mephitic Blight Haulers or if these are from the Blight drones, but very similar actually to what you get on the top of Terminators. These are these kind of destroyer hive type things like you see on Typhus, these kind of weird vents with smoke sticking out of them. Now I chopped them up, but I wasn't sure I was going to like what they were going to look like. So here's one of your hobby tips, bit of a hack for you. Blue tack, if you can't decide if something's right, bit of blue tack, rolled it into a sausage here and stuck then these like the vents into that blue tack, really so I could see what it would look like before I stuck them on permanently. Had a play, looked around, did I like how the tone of the model looked, played with the different angles and things you could put them into until I decided I found one I liked, and then I stuck it on again with the same green stuff process we've seen already. Now, going a little bit crazy here, this was part of the model where I thought, oh, could I be about to ruin this? I thought, no, let's go for it. Clippering out the storm bolters that you get in both sides of the Dreadnought, and really hacked that out and put on one of the larger horns you see there, again from the Glockkin model. I felt like I needed to do something a little bit more like that to really push the boat out on this kind of, demonic possession. A couple of horns on the top were nice, but this third big one I think adds really a different element. And again, when you see the hellbrute rules, it does have kind of close combat attachments, and I thought an extra horn would mash into that. Now I'm showing you something now that you're not going to see on the final model. So why are we showing this? Well, one, was a nice little bit that I think I built, but two, it shows you when you're doing these things, just experiment and play. And if it doesn't work out, you choose not to use it, doesn't matter, and this part will be potentially used in a later kit bash. So this is Mortarian's spare arm. When you build Mortarian, you can build his weapon in either arm, so you get a spare kind of arm and a haft of the scythe there. The banner, I couldn't tell you where it's from. I'm assuming it's a Glockkin one, which is a really cool Nurgle banner, and then it's the scythe part from a Terminator, I think. Sort of kit bashing that together really from that and making it into what I think is quite a nice Nurgle banner. My original scheme was to have this either stuck out the top of the Dreadnought or maybe to sculpt on a tentacle coming out the body of the Dreadnought to be kind of holding it. Changed my mind against it because it got a little busy, but you can see here when I was starting to put the Nurglings on, you can see where I blue tacked the banner onto the base, because that's kind of where I was going to put a tentacle coming out of the body of the Dreadnought. But I just thought it got a little too busy. But watch out for that part in a future build maybe. So now it's time to Nurgling up the model. So I'm taking a few of the different Nurglings. I put 7 on the base in total. I won't show you where they all are, mostly because I lost some of the footage. But taking different Nurglings and having them scattered around the model to really give a little bit of a scenic element to it. One thing I did do was actually clipper off some of the bases of the Nurglings to get them into these places, and these are just the Nurglings that come with the Plague Bearer set. I think you get 9 in a Plague Bearer set. Chose to use 7, including, I don't know if you saw him, a little Nurgling head popping out of the area where the plague bearer is. The plague bearer looks screaming and angry. The Nurgling looks quite happy, so you'll see him in a later shot. And then it's going around really kind of filling in the gaps, because there's a few gaps and things there where the body of the plague spewer doesn't quite meet the las cannon. So filling a few gaps in, finishing off some little bits of battle damage, and then finishing touches. So I'm rolling a little kind of sausage of green stuff here to fit in with the Nurgling that's stood on the leg of the hellbrute here. And this Nurgling's in the real kit is pulling the intestines out of a plague bearer. So I've got him pulling intestines. I don't know, is it a worm, a Nurgling butt rope, or whatever this thing is, pulling out of the back of the Dreadnought there. The other Nurgling's really kind of on the base, really, and then I'm going to drill a hole in the back of that power plant you see there to have a little Nurgling face sticking out, which you'll see shortly. So that is the bulk of the build. Really happy with how it turned out. It was quite a bit experimental as I was going, to really just making things up as I kind of go along for what felt cool as I was doing it. So yeah, great. I'm going to paint this up in a different video. And I'm going to show you some finished shots in a second. Not 100% sure what scheme I'm going to paint these in. I'm thinking of moving away from the Death Guard, or staying with the Death Guard, but doing a different colour scheme for a different kind of Death Guard faction. So keep an eye on the channel for some stuff going on with that, as it's coming up fairly soon. So just decorating the base, and this is just some of the Games Workshop technical thing. It's a Sterling mud paste, using it really around the base of the Nurglings for where the base is a bit too thick and it isn't blending into the base properly, and that's it really. And it's time to sort of get this painted. Do a 360 view in a second so you can see the finished model in a very kind of slightly gloomy, slightly dark video spin that I've done. But what I like about this, I think the Nurglings have some real character. You can see the one sticking out the back of the power plant there. A couple of the happy little chappies scampering around the base. I think I've got enough weird demonic craziness on there to really amplify the Nurgle part, and not too much. And you can see obviously in there the little Nurgling who looks a nice happy chappy next to that plague bearer face. Do some close-in shots in a minute of the Nurglings. So really pleased with this one. Again, keep an eye on the channel because I will be painting this up in a future video. This video has been incredibly long, so I didn't want to paint it in here and make it even longer video. Close up of the Nurglings, Nurgling with a butt rope, one of my favourite parts. Happy guy at the chamber there. So if you did enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe, all that normal YouTube jazz. Check out my Death Guard playlists, and I will see you on another video.